you can get a lot of feedback from an instrument like this because it's a really big guitar, and you'd be surprised for those who haven't seen New West play live. We can sometimes get to some volumes, some good volume in some room, and so I've always found that muting with this guitar, helps me tame a lot of that. And in an interesting way, when you mute the string too, I feel like you cut out all of that, high-end frequency that isn't necessary for certain parts. And when you're playing really rhythmic in the group and trying to keep a groove, even down to the rhythm playing, I feel like that the muting really is such a key ingredient with that kind of part. And then when you play more melodic lines in New West and you got a lot of sustain, and you're really getting more of the sweetness in the tone. But yeah, muting has been a big thing, and definitely, I mean, we talk about this a lot. When we all started this band, I feel like our technique really bloomed in the right hand and the left hand control, and really learning how to use those parameters to make the group sound tighter, for sure.
And Perry, we had an interesting moment in our sound check at the Grizzly Peak Winery on Friday, where you went out into the audience section to listen to what our blend was, which we'll do often. Someone goes out in the audience and just gives a quick listen, because as we know, it sounds a lot different from the audience perspective than it does to us with our 10-inch amp speakers on stage, right?
Right.
And you made a note to me that was really good. I wanted to just kind of discuss it. Said, hey, FYI, your high end's getting a little lost out in the house. It doesn't sound like it does right up on your amp. So to compensate for that, maybe boost my highs a little bit, turn my lows down. Talk a little bit about your experience of just general sound checks with New West over the years and things you've learned.
Yeah, boy. Well, as we can all attest to, it is a bit of a process to dial in our sound as a group, to where we really feel like what we're hearing on the stage is what the audience is going to get as well. And one of the more frustrating elements of being a guitar player, especially a jazz guitar player, is exactly what you're talking about, Will. When you're on stage and you're hearing your sound and you're going, okay, I like what I'm hearing. And then someone like me goes 30, 40 feet out in the audience and it sounds significantly different. And that has to do a lot with like the acoustics of the hall you're playing in, maybe the lack of the hundreds of people that are about to show up. Because as we know, when you put a bunch of warm bodies into a room, it's going to help dampen the sound, and it's going to help achieve more of the clarity that you're hearing on stage that may not be present in sound check. But you can't always rely on that. So I think part of the process is just having somebody there that you can trust, whether it's a band member or a manager or a sound person that you're really, you have a trusting relationship with, which can take time with sound people. Just so you can know, all right, well, this person's telling me my sound is not as clear, so I have to adjust. But that is the frustrating part, because then you kind of have to accept hearing your sound on stage in a way that you may not want to.
Yes.
And when it comes to New West, one thing that I have realized over the years is that my approach to tone has to be an approach that works for all three of us, which is different than my approach for tone when I'm playing with my quartet. Right, which is bass, drums, and piano, or bass, drums, and saxophone. Because we're all playing the same instruments, because timbrally we're like very close, you know what I mean? We have to sort of realize that when we blend our sounds together, the choices that we make in tone are all going to affect each other. So oftentimes I try to play with a bit of a brighter tone than I want, because I think the combination of playing either in the mix with you and John, or if I'm playing the lead, being slightly above you and John, it comes together as a more full, balanced tone between the three of us than if I was the only guitar player in the band. I might establish a different sound. Now, we're talking about minutia details that maybe a lot of people wouldn't hear, but for guitar players, it is significant, and it does make a difference in terms of how the overall sound is achieved.
It would be really interesting to be able to watch one of our gigs from the perspective of the audience, just to sit there and watch a gig, listen to what it sounds like after all these years, because we would probably just learn a bunch of things that we didn't quite get being on stage, or listening back to recordings. The recordings compress the audio. They, it's not quite the same. That being said, a big part of us tweaking our live sound is listening back to gigs that we've done and just hearing, whether it's like, the blend of the pencil mics for the acoustic guitar versus, how bright or dark the solid state amps are for the arch tops,